backwards, really fast, fast as we can. Really put the pedal to the metal, you know? Bill and Ted did it.
All right, everybody, we are proud to have Deke Kincaid here from Digital Domain. And I probably will just go ahead and let him take the reign here and introduce himself.
Yeah, I'm Deke Kincaid. I work at Digital Domain, as mentioned. I live in Los Angeles. Digital Domain has offices in many different places. But yeah, I'm actually in, that's our office there in Playa Vista. We moved there, I think, it's probably like 6 or 7 years ago. Or so. I forget exactly when. But it was originally the mocap stage from Image Movers Digital that they used on their films. They actually had a mocap studio, and we actually absorbed the mocap studio. So we actually inherited their office when essentially Google kicked us out of Venice. Google essentially absorbed the whole street. They have essentially bought up all the leases on a street, and one by one they were actually the DD offices that they took over, and then DD consolidated the Los Angeles office to this one, which it's a cool place.
There's a huge history with Digital Domain. Lots of ups, lots of downs, and now you guys are up on the up and up again, which is awesome. But what's it like entering into a place like that? That must be pretty wild.
Yeah, it was cool. I actually used to. So I worked for the Foundry from 5+ years, and I actually worked at the office a block, less than a block from the DD office in Venice. So DD was my main place. I was constantly going and visiting in Venice. So I was always visiting them, and I was essentially their main contact with the people back in London. And I was always going and talking to them and getting feedback on the software and seeing if they have any issues they need to resolve, that are emergencies, things like that. We had this thing called just the Comp Council or Nuke Council that we always did. So essentially, the job spawned from those meetings. I was looking to go elsewhere, and I talked to them. They had a position open for a VR Pipeline Supervisor, and I contacted them, and then I went to work for them. But it's pretty cool. It's a really neat place.
Let's just go. First off, me and Deke, we met each other through the Foundry User Group meetup, working in Chicago. Being in Chicago, being a lone island, we were like, we needed a place of headquarters for the Foundry User Group meetup. So I started reaching out, working for Tribeca and saying, hey, can you guys, they're like, well, where do we set up base camp? And at the time, I don't think the mill or Framestore wasn't really established yet in regards to those types of things. But I was like, hey, we can make the school the headquarters for the Foundry User Group meetup for Chicago. And it brought in some incredible artists. And from there, it was a great place for everyone to meet. And I had a lot of students that went off to work for like ILM and so forth from there and worked for the Wachowskis. So it was one of the awesome, and you were one of the first people that came over that flew out. And it was really an awesome time. And it was like what I say, the golden age of the Foundry, I think. I don't know. It was... And it was just a blast. But anyway, let's go back into your history here. We got a lot of questions, especially about your new your position here as what position are you got right now? I'm sorry, I keep messing it up here. It's a large name, Senior Pipeline Supervisor.
Yeah. So I'm Senior Pipeline Supervisor at Digital Domain. I manage the group, most of the 2D pipeline, and I manage the pipeline for commercials, essentially for those different departments.
How many employees are at D&D in LA right now?
So it fluctuates up and down. Obviously, because of tax incentives, there's a lot more people in Vancouver. But Vancouver's actually completely full. There's actually no room in the Vancouver office. Wow. They're actually having to expand there because we're so busy. So, and we also have a whole experiences unit and the mocap, previs, post-viz that are all down in Los Angeles. So that I'm completely guessing here what the number is right now, but maybe in the 200 range-ish in Los Angeles, but that might be high. I don't know.
You have an incredible history here on your IMDB in regards to compositing, going back to the early 2000s here. So you've jumped around to a lot of different studios, and again, I won't go into, because of time. We could spend 5 interviews on all of your experience.
Sure.
But before we even do that, almost like sad news, or I don't know. You can make the decision. The school you went
Oh
to
yeah,
abruptly shuts. Huh?
yeah. I heard. I had some instructors that were good friends over there, and they've still been teaching there since I was there. So yeah, it was a little bit of a bummer that they went out of business. But that the whole art institutes went up and down all over the place since I've been there. Even when I was going there.
I used to teach there when
Mm-hmm.
way back in the day. I think 2008, 2009. And I only taught there for a little time, but they had their stuff together, and I was teaching game design coming from NetherRealm, and they really really had it together. And then I heard like Goldman Sachs bought them out or something, and then things started
Yep.
going south, and then ours closed. Chicago, I was shocked to hear that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had a whole boatload of kids like like in stowaways, but like people on boats, coming over to our school. So yeah, it was kind of sad in a way. I was just like, man, but
Yeah, I think there were 20 schools when I was there, and they were expanding at the time. They had expanded from like 10 to 20 schools when I was there, and then they expanded to like 100, apparently, I heard, under Goldman Sachs, or maybe before that. But they bought a lot of schools. And the other thing, I mean, this is completely me guessing, but a lot of schools, they would gather a lot of students from different areas in states surrounding them. And as you add more schools, you have less people to pull from. That's what it felt like for me. Even when I went to school in Pittsburgh, I remember they'd pull people from Ohio, they'd pull people from little parts of New York, West Virginia, all over. And as you add more schools, there's less people to grab from.
I was talking to a couple of my teachers that were there just before the close, and they said the quality of the students went down the tubes because because they were really needing students or whatever. And
Yep.
it's kind of like I could write a whole book on education. I'm no longer.
Oh, yeah.
I'm currently no longer teaching. I'm just doing freelancing. But man, I could
Mm-hmm.
write a whole book on VFX education.
Oh yeah, there's a whole bunch of there's many other things too. Yeah. I mean, even we made fun of. There was a lot of administrators that are essentially people trying to get what we called salespeople, but I forget the name for them. But the people trying to bring people in, and there's a lot of fibbing about the stuff they would tell the incoming students. Sometimes that you just groan when you hear them say something to someone.
I remember at where I used to teach, I won't say where, but we would have the tour groups come in and be like, so you're working on soft image, right? And we're like, we haven't used soft image in like 10 years.
Yeah.
So yeah, but anyway, back to you. So you started out in the Pittsburgh area?
Yeah, so I'm from New England, and then I moved to Ohio for high school, and then I went to school in Pittsburgh. I was between a few different schools. The main reason I went was actually their industrial design program. They had a makeup program. It was kind of before, computer animation, 90, 95. There was computer animation, but in schools it was quite small, and anyone that was that was doing a computer animation program had CGI or SGIs, sorry. And the trouble is, every place I visited, they essentially said, "Oh yeah, you could use the SGIs in the graduate program." And I was like, "I don't want to wait 4 years to learn any of this." And I was also kind of bouncing back and forth of doing physical effects or doing computer effects, and I kind of decided to go with something that was kind of in between. And they had an industrial design program there, and they had essentially the people in the industrial design program, kind of could jump between the different sides. They could do stuff that's physical, but also do stuff that is actually in computers. So, industrial design is a mix of those two.
So from there, you jumped into compositing. Do you want to kind of give us a little bit of background where you started? I always throw up the IMDb, but I'm sure you might have started in commercial work as well. Was it?
Yeah, I actually, right out of school, I actually worked at the Carnegie Museum of Natural History. And I actually did some projects there. I did some dome video, which is quite ironic because it's the way you work in dome video is very much like how you work in VR now, it was pretty funny that it kind of came in a big circle. 4 or 5 years ago when VR started becoming big, I was like, oh, this is the same exact thing I did with dome video in theaters at different kinds of museums and stuff. So yeah, I did a lot of stuff for that. And then I essentially just said, hey, you know what? A bunch of my friends have moved out to LA. I want to work in LA. I'm just going to move out there and just try to get a job. And a really really funny thing is I actually I had driven up to Toronto to take a shake class. So there was I think this is 2000 or 2001, the Shake GUI had just come out, and they were doing shake classes in a few different cities, and Toronto was, I forget how many hours away it was from Pittsburgh, but I decided to drive up there and take the class, and Gary Jackmonk, the guy who actually taught the class, I told him, I want to move to LA, and he's like, yeah, whatever. I don't know if that's a great idea. And the most ironic thing is that Gary is the guy that hired me in my first job. I actually went to an interview, and he was in the interview room, which is super small world. It's just amazing stuff like that. So Gary was in that interview, and they hired me as essentially a technical person. So it's before Cat in the Hat that's listed there on IMDb. It was a place we were doing a ride film for Legoland down south of here near San Diego. So yeah, a place called Cimex.
There it is, Cimex Digital Studios. I'm going by your LinkedIn, which is very, very long.
So I got a job as a technical assistant. It was a technical assistant. It was really a glorified render wrangler, but the position was called technical assistant. And yeah, I got that. That was probably, I think I moved here in November or December of 2001, and then essentially I got that job I think in January. So yeah, January, February, or something like that.
From there, you've went on to Ocean Monsters. Ocean Monsters,
a lot of music videos, a lot of commercials. It was a fun place. And then the next one, the Cobalt Effects, was again Gary, the guy who got me hired at Cimex. He created his own effects company. He called me to work on Cat in the Hat. So there was a company called GVFX out of Vancouver and LA that was going bankrupt, and Gary was working for them. They still had a contract to do this work for Cat in the Hat. So essentially, in Cat in the Hat, it was really basic, but it was essentially there was all this splatter and mess that Cat in the Hat makes as he creates destruction, and they didn't like the color it was. So they wanted to change the color of it. So it was a super roto paint job of just cleaning up essentially all these shots and adding a little bit extra mess, and then also changing the color of all these things in hundreds of shots. So essentially, Gary started this place in he owned a house in Venice, and one of his apartments he was refurbishing the apartment. So essentially, he just put the studio in that apartment. So the apartment was kind of a big mess, but we took a bunch of the computers from GVFX and essentially just made a studio of like 5 or 6 of us to do that whole film.
Chronicles of Riddick, that's one of my favorite movies.
We kept on getting more films. So we got Van Helsing, we got a little bit of Van Helsing, we got some Chronicles of Riddick, a little bit of Fantastic Four. What's that movie with I don't know if it's on there.
Team America World Police?
Team America, that was a fun one. Team America, actually, they originally wanted to remove all the wires from the shots because there were so many, all the wires from the puppets and stuff. Mm-hmm. They wanted to remove the wires, but they actually realized that it was a lot of work, number one. And number two, it didn't necessarily need to be done. No one really cared that the wires were there. That was kind of part of the shtick in the film. So they actually decided to skip that and only remove the wires for very shots with lots of different characters in the shot where the wires became kind of annoying and in the way. And then it was a lot of adding fake squib hits and bullet explosions and things like that. It was a bunch of little stuff. It was fun. It was a cute movie.
And then
Yuko You and Company. So Garson Garson YU is the guy who created the company. So it's U plus Company. You and Company.
And then we have your first entering. Is this? I'm assuming you might have been in before, but Pipeline. Is this your beginnings from switching to compositing to Pipeline?
Yeah. Well, also that original job, the technical assistant, that was very technical. That was a technical position also. So I was always the most technical person in most of my jobs. Anything that had had a problem that needed to be solved, they would give it to me because I could kind of figure out stuff with cameras and I was good at math and stuff like that. So I usually could kind of figure out those hard problems. So, but yeah, I helped set up a lot of stuff at that company. That company was also kind of just a four-wall. Essentially, they just rented a few offices at a business park. And yeah, they didn't really have any render farm. They didn't really have any pipeline. So I was setting up a lot of things for that.
And then, of course, you've got to work the illustrious Rhythm and Hues, and then Momentum VFX, working on a lot of television stuff.
Yeah.
So you got. I mean, would I be wrong to say you've got like 20 years of experience compositing?
Something like that. I mean, I kind of, like, since 2010, I really haven't composited, though.
That's right. You switched over to working. You worked for a very long time, actually, with the Foundry, right? Before you returned? Okay.
Yeah, so it was 5 years at the Foundry. I'm almost 4 years at DD. So I've been more on the software side since, essentially 2010 was my last actual compositing gig. And I fully switched over to being technical.
Would you go back?
No, I'm actually perfectly happy on the technical side. Gotcha. You get to go home at the normal hours. You don't have shot, because compositing, you're at the very end of the pipeline. You're at the end of everything. You are like essentially lighting and compositing. You are working massive hours. I go home. I see like whole teams in my office. Like essentially all the compositors sit right next to the TDs, and unfortunately, so our room is extremely dark. And any lights you turn on, they come over and ask you to turn them off because they are bugging them. And so essentially, yeah, I see those guys. They're making tickets and still working till past midnight every night. And I go home at 7-ish, 7 p.m. every night. So I'm happy to do that. I'm fine with that.
Especially when you have a wife and child.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
So that's a good. Well, obviously, you got to be really smart to move up to these TD positions. Obviously know a lot of scripting in Python and a lot of programming and so forth. And I think you get enough compositing where you start to really get pipelines jumping from studio to studio. But maybe you can elaborate on this. I mean, what was ultimately the thing that you were like, what, this is what I'm going to stick with. I'm going to go with this. And I mean, was it just like this, just love for the pipeline?
Actually, it's not even pipeline. It's more like workflow. It's making
sorry.
people's. No. There is plenty of people that code and do pipeline, but what I'm really interested in is essentially making people's life easier, making everything more efficient, making everything faster for them, getting rid of those roadblocks. Essentially, the 3D all software for computer graphics is generalized. It's made for everyone, but it's not specialized to a studio. For us, having more buttons is actually a bad thing. You want less options for people. You want to have them click one button and it does 20 things. If you have an artist literally clicking 20 buttons just to do render, make a QuickTime or make a JPEG sequence or send something to dailies, that's not a good idea. That's a lot of that's extra work that people have to do, and also that's hard to scale. If you have, we're like in this 500-600 people range in North America. We might be more than that now. I'm not sure actually, because we're out of room. We actually might be more than 600. But yeah, having 600 people having to manually do that, you're going to get the wrong thing or different things with every single person. So essentially, just making all that very efficient, making it, smoothing out those processes is something I just really enjoy doing.
Now, do you collaborate with the other pipeline folks that are in, say, Vancouver, Montreal, or Hyderabad? I can never say that right.
Hyderabad.
Hyderabad.
So yeah, actually, North America is pretty much one studio. We all have cross-site meetings all the time. We all work on the same pipeline. We're all our computers are in the same location. They're all in Portland. We actually don't have a separate server. We used to actually. When I first joined, we did. But the friction we removed just by moving all the computers into a single location was huge. It was pretty awesome because what happened was before we had to have a transfer software to transfer stuff between locations, and that took time. So now someone renders it in Vancouver, they just say, here's a path, and you just go to it, and you can just grab it. So that's awesome. So,
you're at the forefront then of this whole reality of like mobile or cloud, processing and pipeline. Do you see a future, as a lot of my guests have talked about, where there's that remote reality of artists working remotely of different locations, or are you going to just the amount of money for the security is just too much or too risky?
Yeah, there's actually MPA and essentially rules that prevent that for a lot of people. There's actually people that they're not actually allowed to, according to MPA rules. Essentially, if someone is remoting in and doing actual non-technical work, and you can actually pull up a screen and you can record a screen, that's actually against by certain people's thoughts. That's against MPA rules. So there's actually that works for like Disney. Disney owns the IP, so Disney can actually do that. They can. I have friends that have worked in Disney in the past, and they have a Zero client at home that they just hook up to their router, and they can work from home a couple days a week. But that's because they actually own the IP. We don't own the IP, so we can have people work remote on commercials. We can have people on and possibly episodic, depending on episodic. But when it comes to features, that's not always allowed.
Again, before we get into your current position and all of the wonderful workings with organic and hooking that up to Shotgun and so forth, just you're finishing up through working for what, a digital Asylum.
For Asylum, that's probably a tenth of what I did. Like every day you came in and you did something different at that studio. Like they had so many commercials going through that studio, and films. Like it's like one day you're working on Transformers, next day you're working on the commercial, next day you're working on this 4K film that they need to fix this. What was it? There was a movie with I think it was called Michael Clayton. So in Michael Clayton, there's like this 3,000 frame shot of Clooney and they didn't like something that was on the back window, and they had to remove it. We had to remove it for 3,000 frames. So, and we did that over a couple of days. So you just constantly jumped from show to show at that place. It was a fun place. I had a lot of fun there.
So throughout your entire life, you've basically been up till midnight, like working as an compositor.
Actually, the biggest mistake I made was I was working at Asylum and I was working at Rhythm and Hues at the same time, and I actually regret ever doing that. That actually, because I was working 2 jobs and I was working too much. I thought it was later after the fact. I was like, "Oh, I'm never going to work 2 jobs ever again." But I remember that being like at first I was like, "Ooh, make lots of money," and then it was like, "Oh, my performance, my work suffers from this. This is maybe not a great idea."
That's really what nobody thinks about. They think of like more hours, but it affects performance. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
To a certain degree, obviously. I mean, there's some rock steady people that go nonstop. Obviously, you work side by side with them, and they produce great work. But I mean, at what point does it start to fall off where your performance hits? I mean, or you just got to be just such a rock star that you got to. I mean, is that a certain person, or is there something that doesn't matter about how big of a maverick you are? You're going to hit a wall at this amount of hours, or
yeah, you just get way slower. You just get slower. That's the big thing. No matter how good you are, there's not many people that can do that for long amounts of time. I mean, that's why actually that was the reason why I thought I could do it originally, because Rhythm and Hues, it was an 8-hour day. You left after 8 hours. You almost never worked overtime. So I was like, oh, I'll just go to Asylum and work till 2 a.m. right after I finish it at Asylum. And my work I think at Rhythm was fine. It just I was less and less effective at Asylum.
So Ring of Fire, and now you're getting into character rigging, skinning.
Yeah, so I was doing some TD work at Treyarch. I worked for a game studio for a little while. I would just jumped around.
That's cool. And then Zoic, lead compositor. Back to Waco. Keep saying it wrong.
You and Company. Yeah. The funny thing at You and Company is my first day, I logged into my computer, and the computer was the same computer I had 8 years ago. My email popped up with my last email from my last day at the last time I was there. The sad thing is it was a G5 cheese grater, which I actually could not use. It physically did not. I don't even know why they put me on that machine, but it was just ironic that I was on the same exact box.
Now, I noticed a lot of people work on Oliver Stone's W. I don't know, I've seen a lot of people. There must have been a lot of visual effects in that movie for just being a movie about George W. Bush. I don't know.
Really? I didn't think there were that many studios on it. And like I remember because I was at Method, and I don't remember what other studios.
I just keep bumping into people that are working on. I always see W. That always sticks out because it's one letter, you know.
Yeah,
But
I wonder if they were all at. Were they all at Method?
maybe it's probably the coincidence. That'll be my, you know.
Yeah, that was a fun one. That was. I mean, all our shots got cut. That was the only bummer. He decided to do this ridiculous scene which your other people might have explained before, but yeah, it's essentially of George Bush on a flying carpet flying over Baghdad with it all on fire. It was kind of a ridiculous sequence, and it actually kind of once I saw the movie, because the movie was strangely for Oliver Stone very kind of straight-laced and to the point. It didn't really.
It didn't press any buttons, and it just kind of just was his, you know. And people, those that hated Bush were like, we want more Bush hating, and those that were like thinking it was going to be something that was against Bush were like, oh, this isn't nothing, you know.
So I was actually surprised they cut that scene, because it would have made it ridiculous, just that one scene. But it didn't fit with the rest of the movie, I could see.
So there's a scene where Bush does what again? I'm sorry.
He's on a flying carpet. In his silk pajamas. He was famous for wearing silk pajamas, blue silk pajamas with a cowboy boots and a cowboy hat. So he's on a flying carpet flying over Baghdad while it's on fire. Essentially, it's a dream sequence.
Oh, okay.
So it was ridiculous.
Sounds like Dr. Strangelove there.
Yeah. Yes.
Slim pickings here. So we got PSYOP, match move and compositing. And then there's the match move. Anything to say about match move? Maybe there's people out there who are like, wow, I want to get into match move. Maybe that'll be an in for me. Is that something even possible today, or what do you think that is? Or is it just something that you just...
Yeah, I mean, any large studio, you have a whole team. We have a whole team that does that. We call it integration at Digital Domain. But yeah, it's a full-time job. I mean, any kind of tracking either characters or cameras is still, it's still it's not as big as compositing. Compositing's considerably bigger. There's a lot more positions.
Well, I noticed, different studios I work for, there's a lot of outsourcing of tracking to India and so forth. And
no, actually, you're correct. A lot of our commercials are now done at our Hyderabad office instead of at our local office.
So we got Shade VFX. Sorry if I'm rushing through this. Senior New Compositor Motion Theory. And that was a lot of Nintendo, NFL.
A lot of commercials.
A lot of commercials. I was going to say, is that true? You could probably composite blindfold. I don't think there's any avenue that you haven't no road you haven't gone down, I'm assuming, after all this.
Yeah.
So Technicolor, I saw that. That's a rather interesting reality. I want to share on that a little bit.
Yeah, it was essentially, there was a job in Beijing, and they were looking for actual Westerners to work on it. A lot of Beijing jobs are like, they try to sign you up for 3 years. At the time I had a girlfriend, and actually we were planning on getting married that year. And the idea was essentially, hey, I go work for this job for 6 months, and this pays for our wedding in Mexico. So so we were essentially, we could afford to bring a whole bunch of people with the money I'm going to save from this job. I could afford to pay for a bunch of people coming to our wedding in Mexico. So it worked out. It was fun. It was crazy. Beijing's, bizarro land when you first get there. But it was cool. We had fun. There was essentially 3 of us that were all from the U.S. That were on this. So it was really fun. Like essentially every day we'd go and explore the city, like the 3 of us, and on the weekends we'd go explore. So it was really neat. And there was a few other. There's a few guys from France that worked there that were supervisors. There's a guy from Toronto that was running the studio. But a large percentage of the people were Chinese that were there. But yeah, it was crazy, but it was fun. It wasn't a huge amount of hours, so we actually tended to just work 8-hour days. We actually bought a lot of DVDs because sometimes you get bored. You didn't want to go out, and you got bored, and the DVDs, you go to the DVD store, and they just have wall-to-wall of DVDs, and you negotiate with how much you want to pay for it. So you're like, and this is kind of, streaming, 2010, Netflix, all that stuff's it's still brand new. There isn't a lot of streaming. So yeah, it's all DVDs. So you go get seasons of whatever show you want to watch at the store, and you pay like $5 for a whole season or something like that.
Did you feel sort of isolated, obviously language barrier and so forth, as far as being there?
Yeah. So the area where the studio is no one speaks English in that area. It's like almost no one. Once in a blue moon, you'll hear someone speaking English, and you look around and stuff. But yeah, you kind of get used to it. There was I got to know enough words to direct taxi drivers. I found the right iPhone apps that you could show them that had the location you were looking for. So I got creative. The subways were really cheap. The subways are like 20 cents to go on the subway, at least when we were there. But the thing is, the subways were like 20, 25-minute walks. So a lot of times if you're a group of you just take the taxi, because taxis were really cheap. Taxis were, $5. And there was an expat area. And we go with, essentially, we go to the expat area and do stuff there. Expat area is obviously where all the, international people, that's where all the, people go. There's a lot of Western stores and stuff like that. The only thing is, I was trying to save money, so I tried not to go there too much because essentially food and everything there is the same prices in the U.S. So, normally your food, like if you go to a Chinese restaurant and you get a beer, it was like $3 for a full meal with beer. So it's really inexpensive. Yeah, just lunch. Actually, the studio paid for lunch, so we got lunch and breakfast, and then dinner you were on your own. And yeah, it was $2 to $3. So it's really cheap. So you go to the Western area, you go to the $15, and so or some of the guys want to go to other fancier places and stuff like that. It was all hit or miss sometimes. It depended on the place. But yeah, I was trying not to burn money. So I would do it like one day a week, go with the guys to somewhere. But sometimes they would want to go multiple days a week, and I was like, nah, I'll stay in.
So
but no, yeah, it got used to. You learn to say the different. You learn all the different the basics of how to say fish and chicken and pork, or ask what is this. Essentially, you just point to something on the menu because none of it's in English, so you just point to it and say. Essentially, you ask them what is this in Chinese, in Mandarin, and then you'd pick up just enough words where you could get around. It wasn't that I couldn't have a long conversation, but I got good enough to do stuff there.
So this is where you and I cross paths here. You're at the Foundry, creative specialist, sales engineer, and there was a transition in the Foundry. Somebody bought it out or something, right? Right after, was that before or after you left?
So the Foundry's been bought multiple times. So when I joined, they actually got sold within a year of after so they essentially got sold from one private equity to another. So a year after I joined, they got sold, and then they got sold again, I think 6 months before I left. So they were sold twice in the time I was there, and then they were just sold again in the last few months. So I think they've been sold 5 times, and they were actually owned by Digital Domain a while back. So
that's right.
And that was before essentially the company that owned them when I was there is the one that had acquired them from Digital Domain.
So, and then you moved up to Media and Entertainment OEM Development Manager. What did that pertain to, specifically?
So we had a lot of research and development technologies, and so for example, Digital Domain, the Foundry is known for motion vectors. So a lot of Chronos and tools like that. So essentially, taking those technologies and going and essentially try to sell them to other companies, get them to essentially license the technology from the Foundry. So the software was, so some of the stuff was already licensed to use at GoPro. So that was a project I worked on when I was there. Actually, long before I actually got that job, I was already doing a lot of that for the last, a year before that, a year and a half before that. So GoPro had licensed essentially motion vectors, so you could take something that was filmed at 24 and then slow it down, slow it down to 100 frames a second or something like that. I mean, recently all their cameras, at every resolution shoots, I think 120 or some really high frame rate. But if you don't remember to do that, you have to you want to slow it down after the fact. Essentially, we made it in their software they could slow things down.
So technically, you never really left the industry because you were right at the forefront of the technology as it was evolving in compositing. So it wasn't like someone disappeared for 5 years out of
Yeah.
compositing. You were basically at the forefront, sort of dictating the technology itself, or presenting it, learning it, and so forth. So what was the big jump to go to digital domain?
Yeah, I was looking at moving up. The Foundry, a lot of their management and such was in London, and they kind of at the time they were slowly transitioning, but a lot of their management was in London, and you had to move to London. And London, the cost of living is much higher in London, but the pay is way lower. So it makes it hard for people to transition to go there. Even before I joined the Foundry, I had actually interviewed for positions in London, and they laughed at my rate that I made in Los Angeles, which was quite funny because I don't know. I thought it was strange at the time because I was like, but the cost of living here is 1.5 times, and you're laughing at my rate. And they were like, they were surprised at my rate. But I talked to other people, and they're like, oh yeah, I essentially had to I had to get my pay cut in half to go from Los Angeles to London.
Wow.
And the cost of living, yeah, exactly, yeah, literally in half. The pay was cut in half to go to London. And I just wasn't interested in that.
So would you say there's maybe two different? I'm way out of the picture. I'm still stuck on Desert Island, Chicago here. But
Sure.
would you say there's two different real camps here? There's sort of like the London European camp and then the Canadian American camp, as far as not in a form of division, but just maybe pay rates or is
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure. Yeah, I don't know what they currently are because I haven't looked for a compositing job in a while. Actually, even Montreal is much. That's actually a reason why a lot of people go to Montreal. Montreal is also much cheaper, and artists make a lot less there too. So it's not even North America. Toronto. I know a lot of people won't go to Montreal because the pay cut is considerable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I've been seeing. I've been talking to a lot of people like, hey, try Montreal and so forth, and see what's going on there. I still think it's incredibly competitive there as well. So VR Pipeline now. I love VR. When it came out, I bought an HTC Vive. I started getting into Substance Painter training to port that all into Unreal and all that, and it really was huge and exciting. And then it just felt like there was a little bit of a stagnation as far as like, I don't know what it is. It's just, last night I was playing, I don't know if you ever played in VR, there's a whole bunch of VR games, but specifically Rec Room. I've just been playing that game and maybe two others. And it doesn't seem like there's any other game. I'm like, oh gosh, there it is. It's a bigger and better game. And it's just, I don't know if it's a technological, it's kind of like, I don't know how to say it. You can't get any better than this, or just it can't handle it or something. What's the story with VR today, in your opinion? You obviously at the...
Well, the big thing. So the big thing when I first joined Digital Domain, doing the VR thing is, it was a finding. People would always talk about all this money that's there, but the thing is, people making content. A lot of the content was kind of funded they were almost like commercials essentially. They were essentially something sponsored by BMW or something sponsored by fill in the blank product, but they weren't actually willing to spend the money to actually create something, a quality product. So a lot of it was, they did it at first, but then they're like, whoa, we're blowing a lot of money for this very small audience. And I think there was a little bit of a pickup with cardboard. So Google came out with cardboard, so you could literally just take your phone and stick it on a device. So that was big because the original ones we were designing everything for was the Gear VR. So we had the Gear VR when I first joined. That got to the biggest audience, because anything to do with the Vive or the Oculus, the audience is tiny. It's super small. Everyone's like, oh, why don't they do everything for the ones for the PC? But it's just a really small audience compared to people just having literally a phone that they can just stick on a device and watch. But I think some of the excitement about that went away after a little while with cardboard. But yeah, the big thing we found is having people to actually pay for cool projects that that pay enough to actually make it look good. essentially, because when you're at a big studio, that's a big thing you have trouble with is you don't want to lower the quality level too much because then it reflects back on you. So, sometimes you just have to turn away a bunch of projects because they just won't live up to the quality. You can't deliver the quality that you want to for the price that they want to pay.
I've noticed when I've talked to a lot of people who worked at Disney and so forth and all this, and when they get into VR projects, it's always rush, get it out the door. It's always just these tiny little promotional things with very little dedication to the artistry and really refining it out. So then you moved up to Pipeline Supervisor, 2D Pipeline Manager. And I did read an article just recently. You had an article in here, right here, by Before and Afters. Yeah. So you talk about everything working together like butter. Could you go into detail on that a little bit?
Yeah, the butter is the stuff I mentioned earlier, just essentially wanting to make it so artists just pushes a single button to do, things that if they did it manually would be like 20 steps and take 45 minutes to do. They shouldn't be concerned by that. They should be able to say, send stuff to dailies, and then we do a whole bunch of processes, and you don't care what those processes are as an artist. You just care that you go into the screening room and you can just pop up your video. The director or the VFX supervisor can just pop up a sequence and have all the newest cuts in there without having to manually update everything, or have an artist manually put things into a cut, things like that. It's essentially just smoothing out any roadblocks for artists, make things work easier and faster.
How fast are the computers that you're working on there as compositors? Any specific brand, any specific monitors that people might want to look into? I don't think you guys do BenQ, right? You have the other, I forgot the name of the brand that is...
We have the Dreamcolor, so we have a lot of Dreamcolor. We are looking at some at a refresh because we have a lot of older ones, and those are only good for a certain amount of years, so we really need we have some that are actually uncalibratable. They just don't hold their color, or you randomly come in and they're magenta, so you have to get them fixed a lot. I know they are looking at doing a refresh on them, and they're looking at either the updated Dreamcolor or the Ezio. They're looking at those. So, and it's also what resolution, because even though most features are 2K, we get a lot of episodic recently. We did 2 Lemony Snickets, Lemony Snickets season 2 and 3. Those are all 4K. Anything from Netflix is 4K. So, so we're looking at higher resolution monitors for, being able to see a little more than. I mean, we're not going to actually get 4K because the Zero clients that go to Portland don't actually support 4K.
Okay.
They only support 2.5K per monitor. We can have 4 monitors, but they only support 2.5K per monitor.
I'm assuming you probably work with Richard Cervello. Am I right?
Yeah, he was on. I remember he was on Lemony 3, I think.
Yeah, Lemony. He was talking about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was discussing about like culture and so forth, how Digital Domain still keeps a good way of kind of little perks for you guys once in a while, just to keep it in like a family atmosphere and so forth, which is pretty cool. Mm-hmm. So anybody's interested, just before we get into questions, I was going to jump into those. Anything about Digital Domain? I know you're now the senior pipeline supervisor. So how many supervisors, are you supervising pipeline people now under you? Or I'm assuming that would be...
No, I'm still just, I'm in charge of just still the 2D and essentially anything to do with compositing, roto, textures, and commercials. So essentially those I have a group of, I think I'm back up to 8 or 9 TDs, I think, essentially, that I directly manage. But then there's a bunch of, depending on the project and the commercial and stuff, I have other ones. But essentially there's a senior pipeline supervisor in Vancouver, Claude, and then I am the senior pipeline supervisor in Playa.
Being obviously the best of the best and working with the best of the best, for those of our viewers at home, they'd be interested of ideas of education or direction, or both geographically, educationally. Any advice as far as who you see working with you day in and day out, that their history of the paths they went in regards to learning about it, or are they just all prodigies and just from different backgrounds?
We have people from all over the place. So we have people that are, went to school for computer science. So obviously people from computer science, they have a foundation in, doing software development. But there's a ton of people that essentially started out as DPAs. So DPAs are essentially render wranglers at Digital Domain. And probably at least 6 or 7, maybe 8, it might be probably more than that. There's a bunch of people that essentially started as DPAs and moved up to being a TD. You have to write a lot of little scripts to do things on the front for, moving data or rendering stuff or making what we call presets for, we call a thing called Shooter. Shooter's our application for sending stuff to dailies. So essentially, Shooter takes whatever image sequence and it reformats it and adds overlays and then compresses it in like 5 different formats depending on who's going to look at it for the client and for the VFX supervisor and different people. So they make presets for those for shows. So they become very technical people, and essentially they're a good group of people a place to kind of start out at and kind of move them up into a TDs. There are some that become artists. We definitely have some that went from DPAs to artists, but a larger percentage actually come into being a TD. So yeah, we have people that are all over the place. It's a wide variety of different backgrounds.
That's cool. So in regards to, could you give me a little bit of background without obviously with the permissions, on understanding of how the program or the management system of Organic works?
Are you talking about our asset management system?
Yeah.
Organic? Oh, okay. Yes. So it's kind of hard. So Organic is essentially our asset management system. It's like Shotgun. Shotgun has an asset manager in it, but we wrote our own called Organic. So it's essentially just it's a database. It's a MySQL database, and it just keeps track of all your assets. So we have GUI front ends for that, and we have a lot of different kinds of front ends that interface with that. But essentially, it just allows you to kind of store all your data from all different places and retrieve it. So we do a lot of publishing. So to make things move smoothly, an artist from different departments, so let's say you start with modeling. Modeling will publish a model, and then it'll register it in Organic, so then the person that's doing the texture can go into Mari, open up what's called our asset browser, and then say, give me Bob body or Thanos body, pull it into my scene, and they don't have to know where to look for it on disk. They don't have to know what version number. Essentially, it also holds currency. So currency is almost what you call what's approved. So you'll have version 7, and you say, as a modeler, you'll go and get that reviewed, and version 7, you'll say, mark that as current. So, okay, now that's the version, whatever's current is the version that the next department should be picking up. So now the texture artist picks up the current model, paints the textures, and then they publish their textures. And they, when they get the versions that they're working on approved, they mark that as current. And then the lighting artist the look dev artist pulls in both of those, makes a material, and marks that as current. So you see how it kind of builds one department after another.
And all of this is being pulled from Portland.
Yes, it's all in Portland, and everyone's machines are in Portland. So there's no machines under anyone's desk. They're all in Portland.
Wow. So being the senior pipeline guy here, I'm assuming the films that you were sort of in charge of here, Spider-Man, Avengers, Infinity Wars, and Avengers Endgame?
I actually wasn't in charge of those. Those are just the ones I got credit on. Okay. So unfortunately, what happens at larger VFX companies is TDs, unfortunately, are on the bottom of the list of getting credits. So it's based on how many hours you bill to a show. So whoever bills the most amount of hours gets credit, and then they have a certain amount of slots. I actually worked on every single film that DD has done since I joined, or probably 95% of them. But these are just the ones I got credit on. So I wasn't actually the pipeline supervisor on these specific projects.
Gotcha.
I just via working on them got credit.
Any challenges during any of these recent films that you've worked on that you'd like to discuss, or?
Let's see. There's a ton. There's a ton. Let's see. Trying to think. Actually, right now. So another thing I brought up before our VR. So we converted VR to AR and then AR to XR, and now it's experiences. So we found that people will actually pay for VR stuff if it's actually if it's an experience. It's a kind of a something at a museum, something at a promotion event. Something that has only certain number of people can actually go see. So they'll actually pay a fair amount for these. So right now we're actually working through a lot of a pipeline of getting our VFX pipeline to actually work with video game engines, Unreal and Unity and such, and essentially working on that whole workflow of getting things moving over.
You're near a hospital, right? As you were saying.
No, not a hospital. Just I live on a main street.
Oh, okay.
There's a fire station and a police station down the street, and people they race down the street. That's all.
Yeah, we were at when we were having our user group meetups, if you recall, we had fire trucks going every 5 seconds over at Tribeca.
Yeah.
Because we were like in the heart of downtown.
Street. Yeah.
So let's go, if you don't mind, just stories you'd like to share to the audience. I mean, you're looking at an audience of a lot of compositors and so forth. I'm just.
Yeah. I have to go. I'll just go by stories will come up when people ask me questions, but there's just so many different things that have come up. I mean, I've worked on stuff all the way from the huge films to small little ones where no one knows what they're doing. But the funny thing is sometimes, at least when it comes to clients, no matter if they're big or small, half the time they don't always know what they're doing, no matter what level they are.
Nobody knows nothing.
Yeah, actually, that was a funny thing. When I went to with the Foundry, I was lucky to go around to other countries. So I would go to China a bunch. I actually went to Japan. I went to Korea. I went to South America, to Argentina and Brazil. And it was quite funny that every single place I would go, people were like, "Oh, you live in Los Angeles. You worked on all these big movies. You don't have all these problems that we have with, people making horrible blue screens and horrible green screens." And I just had to laugh because no. It doesn't matter if it's a $10,000 movie or $100 million or now I think Avengers was a $400 million movie. It doesn't matter. They all have randomly horrible blue screens or horrible things they leave on set. It doesn't. There's just so much stuff to do on set, and people are constantly moving fast, and they're burning money so fast on set that it doesn't matter the budget. They always, it's the same. It's very similar no matter what.
So you guys are working on, I believe, Sonic and then the new Terminator movie, if I'm not recalling.
Yeah, we actually literally just finished the new Terminator movie about a week ago, and that comes out the 1st of November. So we just finished that. Essentially, as I mentioned before, the compositors are all next to us in the TD area. So that whole area has been empty for the last week because essentially, and this happened when I worked as you work so many hours, and then after you just take a week off. You're just like, I just don't want to work. I just don't want to do anything.
What films are you guys upcoming on, or can you even talk about that without getting in trouble?
I'm trying to. I'd have to go look and see what they've said. Hey, we're hiring people for these shows. I'm trying to.
Are you guys fixing the Sonic the Hedgehog thing that all the fans are having a heart attack over? Or?
No. So as I mentioned before, we have the previs and postvis and virtual production. So that was actually done all by our previs team. So we actually are not doing any VFX on that. That's another company's doing bits. Yeah. So yeah, we did a lot of previs and postvis for what's it called, Black Panther. We did it for obviously Sonic the Hedgehog. But yeah, they're constantly doing films that are. Oh, and Ready Player One. Actually, Ready Player One was the most ironic one where we did previs, we did all the motion capture, and we did all the VFX on Ready Player One. So we actually had 3 completely separate departments all working on that film. So we actually had that movie. I think had the most amount of credits. Although I still didn't get a credit on it.
Are you guys jumping on the next 20 sequels to Avatar? Or?
No, not at the moment. That's
because you guys originally were the ones that started it. I mean, there was a huge connection with James Cameron and Digital Domain back in the day, wasn't there?
Yeah, he hasn't done anything with us for a very long time. So we're not. I know they're working on that down in Manhattan Beach. They have the stage down there in Manhattan Beach, and obviously Weta has an office here. They have an office in Vancouver and obviously in New Zealand. But yeah, we're not working on any of those.
So if you would like to play the part of the prophet with all of your experience, where do you see the future? Is it just smiles and, I mean, are we looking at like is the VFX industry going crazy increasing as far as jobs? Are we going to see a bubble explode with all these Netflix and Disney Channel things? I mean, where do you see the future in like 5 to 10 years? Is it on the up and up or?
I mean, there's tons of work. The work is not a problem. I'm always like, I'm not being a prophet about it, but I'm always interested, like, where are some of these tax incentives? Are they going to keep going? Are they going to end? I don't know. I always find it interesting, government's funding. I mean, people always say that, it's kind of like funding theater. Although I feel it's kind of, it's money going into, Hollywood movies' pockets, but or it's helping them. It's spreading the risk, actually, to be honest. It's spreading the risk, but with governments paying for it. But yeah, I'm always interested where that's going. I don't know where that's going to go. I definitely see more stuff spreading around the globe. I mean, that's been happening all along. But with, for example, us, and I know other studios do this where they have a central data center. But like syncing data, the whole 24-hour pipeline, people always sometimes sell that as, it's a benefit, but it's actually really hard to do. It's actually extremely complicated. Like, you lose a huge amount of time between different time zones. Even with us working with India, the thing I always have to tell people is, they're perfectly capable artists in India. They're good people, but if you're on a short deadline, it takes that back and forth. It takes time because they're literally going home when you're coming in, and you may only have like an hour to give feedback, and then it's another day. Or if you miss them when you come in, if they've already gone home early, or you might miss them, and it might be 2 days before you have another conversation. So not being in the same time zone, actually, even with Montreal now, the 3-hour difference, everyone goes home at 3 p.m. for us. Mm-hmm. So you have to make sure you pre-tell them stuff ahead of time the night before to make sure you get stuff ready, because people here, you always get notice of stuff at like 5 p.m., like just before I'm ready to go home. Hey, there's a bug in this. We need this fixed now. I'm like, dang it. Why are you telling me this now? You couldn't have told me this at noon.
If you don't mind, we're going to get into some questions here from the people that have emailed in, and there is a lot of them.
Okay.
Everyone's very excited about having you on, man. Can just sense it. This is VFX Todd. Do you have to deal with multiple resolutions in a single project? If so, how do you incorporate them into the workflow?
Okay. So we do have a few films that do this. I don't ever understand this because you're making one resolution movie at the end. So most of the time we actually try to lock people down to a single resolution that you deliver. But for example, like commercials, we'll have to, at the end, we'll take that and convert it to different resolutions. Essentially we have a system where we can set up and say this shot is this resolution and this shot is that resolution. We just have a preference system essentially for setting those kind of things.
Cool. Vortex Show, fantastic. Forgive me that I might ask a couple questions in this one. Okay, Matthias Backman. Let's jump to his question. Working in smaller and bigger companies, as well as on the other side in development, implementation, the software we use, what were your experiences? What are the differences in working in small pipelines with only a few extensions in a company with a big R&D and sophisticated pipeline like D&D, and indirectly developing?
Yeah, so it's what I mentioned before. DD, tries to smooth out everything because you are dealing with hundreds of people, and every, minute you can save is huge. So you want to lessen that. In small studios, I would have to make those quick times manually. I would have to, make sure I have a gizmo or something that in Nuke that properly sets up stuff how the client wants it delivered. But you always have to make sure someone applies that, and you have a lot of missteps. You have to go and QC everyone's work a little more to make sure they they've done it correctly before you send it off to the client.
What has been the best development in Nuke's history so far? I'm assuming he's referring to your experience working at the foundry.
I mean,
we're going to be going back and forth. Basically, I tell these people,
yeah,
like, go and research his background and then come with questions.
Okay.
So they're probably looking at a little bit of your history, not so much, so you're going to get questions about Pipeline. You might get questions about compositing.
Yeah, sure. So Foundry had probably 21. They had probably had 21 releases of Nuke when I joined. So I think Nuke 6 had just came out when I joined, or maybe, yeah. I think I was working on it when 6.1 came out, and I left when 9.0 came out. So that 9.0 had just come out and I left. I'm trying to think. There was a lot of really cool different things that they added in there. I think Deep was a big thing that they added when I was there. That was really cool. And they're slowly making it better now. They kind of got away from that for a while. What else is in? A lot of cool research and development projects, improving a lot of stuff around the camera tracker. I loved that. Was actually my favorite group to work with was the R&D group at the Foundry. So the guys from R&D would always come out to LA, and I always had the pleasure of bringing them around to all the studios. I would kind of set up all the meetings. Myself and one of my other coworkers here in LA, and we just had so much fun going visiting the clients, and essentially just you tried to get them to go to a wide variety of different clients and kind of get them to see feedback from people that big studios but also little studios, because essentially the people they would see would actually affect the what they decide to do next. That was essentially checking with everyone, saying, hey, we've kind of prototyped a couple of these tools. What do you think about them? Are they cool? Are they useful? Or would they save you a lot of time? Would it, and we would get that feedback. So any of the R&D stuff, a lot of the stuff in NukeX is essentially a lot of stuff from the research and development group at the Foundry.
They've done some. They've added some really nice tools with 12 recently.
Yeah. Actually, the smart vectors. They were working on that before I left. Those were really cool. I think the smart vectors are awesome.
Everyone I interviewed is like smart vectors, man. That's where it's at.
Oh, they are awesome.
So as a consultant of a lot of companies, what are the most common mistakes that you see in Pipeline?
Well, actually, this is something that even happens at Digital Domain. The big thing is trying to make sure you make tools that are generalized enough so everyone can use it. One thing that my supervisor, the global head of Pipeline, always brings up is how Didi used to make a new pipeline for every show and throw it away. Or they wouldn't necessarily throw it away, but they would just they would have 3 films going, and each of the 3 films would have a pipeline they had written, and then on the next show, whatever TDs were on would just pull the pipeline they worked on from the last one into the new show. So not making reusable things that work for everyone. That's a big thing I've really tried to push in compositing at Digital Domain, and I think it's benefited hugely, because someone will come in and they'll have a great idea for a tool, but I'm like, is that actually useful for everyone? Should I have valuable TDs spend time on making a tool that you're going to use on this one show and you're going to throw away after?
Yeah.
If you are, we're going to make something really hacky and we're going to give it to you, and that's good enough for you. But I'm not going to spend, and also, are you going to actually use that feature? Sometimes artists will think of every possible, thing that they could possibly do with a tool, and they'll ask for all these features, and they'll use 1/10 of them. And it's really frustrating in Pipeline to have people essentially spend all this time working on a tool and then no one uses it, or they use a small amount of it.
I think you've answered a lot of these other questions that are in here before. So if we skip over somebody like Max Salton saying, tell us about the asset management in the Pipeline. You've already kind of discussed that. Vortex Show, what was the reason for you to transition from comp to Pipeline? I think we did cover that, or try to remember.
Yeah, a little bit. It was just because I did a lot of technical things as a compositor, and I just enjoy building tools for people. It's just fun, and I love I just like working on that kind of thing rather than actual compositing.
What do you consider essential knowledge besides Python for a pipeline TD?
So yeah, Python is obviously, that's the big one. But learning Python not in Nuke specifically. So learning how to use Python by itself, because a lot of times when I interview people for positions, they will only know how to use Python in Nuke, and that's it. They won't actually know, general things like just copying files or moving things around. A ton of our pipeline runs outside of Nuke, and it has nothing to do with Nuke.
So like Code Academy, that's free, isn't it? And people can learn that sort of outside of that.
There's so many free, free classes. And actually, like in Los Angeles, the library gets you a free Lynda account via the library. So a lot of libraries will have things like that. You just need to know to go get a library. Because it's funny, I hadn't been to a library in like 10 years, and then I had a kid, and then I was like, oh, library's a fun place to go to get read. But then I found out all these benefits you got at the library. I was like, this is really cool. I get a free Lynda account. And there's some cool, even stuff I can learn from that.
What are emerging technologies in the world of pipeline that you're looking out for?
Obviously, deep learning. That's a huge thing. But deep learning is still really new. And it's evolving at a rapid pace. So a lot of it is us taking the deep learning tools and being able to use them in our pipeline to make things faster. But also the computing power the time you have to spend training it is very expensive. So figuring out, is it worth the training time to actually do that task?
What does a typical workday for you look like?
Okay, so it literally changes every day because it depends on what I'm working on that day. Right now, we're transitioning to Cent 7. So Cent 7 is a version of Linux. So we have our whole OS at Digital Domain is Cent OS 6. It's essentially from Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and we're now transitioning to Cent 7. So I'm doing a lot of work with that, trying to move that over. But yeah, I come in. I have some packages that I'm working on. I look at tickets from the previous day. I will get tickets at 10 p.m. or midnight from a show, and then the next morning they'll be like, hey, is that done yet? I was like, I just walked in the door. You filed it at 10 p.m. I didn't read it at 10 p.m. I need to...
The JB Bartz, how do you learn Python for Nuke, and what are some good strategies to really help make the code stick in your brain? I think we kind of covered that.
Well, it's practice. It's the best way is to essentially figure out a tool you want to write, like something you want to automate, and build it yourself. That's the best way is actually doing it. Just taking a class is only so useful. It's like figure out a tool, something you want to build, something you want to actually do to automate in Nuke, and then work on that. And to start, there's no reason why you can't get stuff off New Wikipedia and cut and paste code and search for stuff online. All of us are also use the web all the time to search for stuff. Even error messages that we get, we'll go and search the web to find out if anyone else has run into it before.
This is the last question.
Sure.
How is the relationship between Organic and Shotgun? Do you use a completely custom backbone for asset tracking and keep it in sync with Shotgun to just be familiar to artists in production? How do they work together, and why use Shotgun at all?
Okay, so Shotgun is actually essentially the artists use for actual shot tracking. So it's used for assigning people to shows. It's essentially what the producers use. So all the producers use it to put people on certain shows, assign them tasks, and also we use it as a front end to create shots. So we kind of use it as our mechanism to create shots. So you say create a shot or create an asset. I want to create Thanos or Thanos glove or Thanos armor, Thanos costume 01. So you go and create that, and then we have a trigger mechanism that goes and creates all the folders on disk. It creates things in dailies. It creates things in organic. So it's essentially a trigger mechanism for from Shotgun. So it's a little bit of a front end for some of those things, and also we use it as a ticket system for issues people have filing bugs for software. So we've actually made it. They've been using it for apparently 10 years, so that they made it so people can say, "Hey, I have a bug in Nuke with this tool, or in Maya with this tool." So that's what Shotgun's for. And then the actual asset management is completely inorganic. The only thing that Shotgun's used for is just that front end of creating shots and creating assets.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show, sir. It's much appreciated. Just happy to have somebody from Digital Domain come on and just kind of give just experiences and so forth. But yeah, it's just been super awesome, and we usually do a year anniversary, so maybe a year from now, if you're interested in telling us what's going on, we'll have a comeback interview. With that, did you want to share anything with the audience before we cut off?
Last words. I'm good.
Oh, okay.
And last words.
All right, awesome. Thank you, sir.